An annual review is an essential part of how I wind down for the year. It allows me to reflect on all the highs and lows of the year gone, measure my progress towards the goals that I set for myself, and reminisce about all the memories that I've created. It's honestly one of the most rewarding things that I do every year, and in the process I learn a lot about myself. And I'd highly recommend you completing your own annual review this year. So in this video, I'm going to show you the different components of my annual review template for 2021 and talk through some of the things that I wrote down for mine. I won't go through every question in detail because some of them are pretty self-explanatory. If you want access to the Notion template that I use, I'll link it down in the description below. Now, this is the third year in a row that I'm completing an annual review, and so while I'm by no means an expert, perhaps there's something in my process that you can apply to your own review. Now, I need to make it clear that a lot of what's in my review isn't original. I've combined bits and pieces from different creators such as Anne-Laure Kumpf from Ness Labs, Captain Sinbad, and Ali Abdal. I structure my annual review as follows. I've got an overall life section and then 5 distinct sections which correspond to what I believe are the essential components of a balanced life. These are physical health, relationship health, financial health, spiritual, mental, and emotional health, and purpose. So let's dive into my annual review process. So this is the document that I use for my annual review for 2021. And as you can see, there's quite a few sections. And we're going to go through each of them in turn. I start off by rating the year as a whole, which is a combination of monthly averages that I provide for each of the months as I'm doing my monthly reviews, and then kind of like an overall score for the year. And then, I sum them together and round them to the nearest number, which in this case is a 7. There were lots of positive moments, such as it was a really fun year. I had lots of new experiences. I got to live out of home for the first time, and I lived with friends in Tamworth, and it was a lot of fun. But there were less positive moments. Obviously, with COVID, we were in lockdown for a fair while, and then this was also my 4th year of med school, which is kind of the hardest. So I was grinding for that for a fair while, and because it was just a difficult year, and I was busy doing social things, I didn't spend as much time on content creation as I wish I had. And so, that's why overall I gave it a 7 out of 10. Also, I just want to mention that I usually don't have these kind of toggles here, but I've got some personal stuff, as you can see, that I'd rather not broadcast to the internet. Okay, so you can see that there are, a fair few questions. I'm not going to go through all of them in depth, but the next one that I kind of want to talk about is about what do you regret that happened in the past year and what are you grateful for from the past year? So I think gratitude is pretty, well established as being able to improve your quality of life by making you more aware of the things in your life that, you have to be grateful for. So I won't talk about that much. But in terms of regrets, I find regret isn't something that's really discussed unless you're on your deathbed, really. And I want to make a separate video in the future about regret and dissecting it, I guess. But I find personally that regrets are something that, pop into mind unexpectedly. And unless I take the time to write them down and kind of understand the steps that led me to, making a regretful action or decision, I won't be able to prevent myself from, making the same mistake in the future. And so the theory behind this is just by, dissecting the reasons why, you had a regretful action, you might be able to prevent it in the future. So the next task in the overall section of the annual review is just to write down a list of content and media from the year gone. And I find this to be one of the most fun aspects of, the annual review, because you get to think about all the stuff that you consumed, whether that be on Netflix or that you've read or that you watched on YouTube, and then just make a list of it. And so I published 2 blog posts on my blog, kajana.com, which you can find linked in the description below if you're interested in checking that out. And then finally, I just kind of talk about my goals for the upcoming year. I just want to mention before we move on to the next section that, as I go through all these sections, I usually copy the relevant stuff back into the overall section because future me only really ever looks at the overall section. So the next section is on physical health, and I keep this section quite simple. There's 3 main questions. What were the things that went well? What were the things that didn't go so well? And what will I focus on next year? And I consider physical health to be comprised of 4 main factors. Those are fitness, diet, sleep, and medical health. And then you can break fitness down into a few different components, which I consider as cardiorespiratory, fitness, musculoskeletal strength, and flexibility. So I want to live a life where I'm as functional as possible for as long as possible. And I want to be one of those grandpas who's, still able to complete a half marathon and who's still squatting 2 plates and, able to touch their toes. And so that's why optimizing for physical health is, an important thing for me. Sleep is also really crucial, not only for its short-term benefits in terms of concentration and productivity and, recovery, but also for long-term prevention of medical conditions such as dementia and mental health conditions. When it comes to medical health, I kind of think about it as like the different preventative things that you can do in order to prevent yourself from getting certain medical conditions. And I think a good example of this is, something like gingivitis or dental caries, which is really preventable if you have a good dental routine. And so that's why I have a 4-part dental routine that I do every single night. Diet is always something that I've struggled with. It's not that I necessarily eat super unhealthily, but I've always wanted to be able to cut successfully, and I've never had the discipline to maintain a successful cut and a balanced diet where I meal prep and I count calories for more than a few weeks. And I also know that I don't really eat as many vegetables and fruit as I should on a day-to-day basis, and nor do I consume as much fluid as I should. And so for me, diet is going to be one of those areas that I really try and focus on next year. So next is relationship health. And the questions here are kind of very similar to what we just had in the previous section. By taking the time to understand the dynamics of my various relationships, I'm better able to deconstruct what I'm looking for in my friends and my future partner and what character attributes I'm attracted to. I think we could all be more selective in our friendships because, as the saying goes, you are the product of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And if you spend time with people who don't enrich your life, then you're kind of losing out in that domain because, you could very easily have friends that do make your life much better. So the next section is financial health. And when it comes to financial health, my main goal is to reach financial freedom. So to achieve this, I need to focus on increasing my income and decreasing my expenditure. And in order to increase my income, I need to learn skills that will allow me to own my own business. As such, the financial health section of this review currently focuses on defining my path to financial freedom, reflecting on my expenditure and saving, and goal setting for the upcoming year. So as you can see in my proposed plan to financial freedom, the ways that I hope to kind of contribute to boosting my income over the next few years is by finishing med school, which will give me a guaranteed job as a junior medical officer. I'm currently working on this full stack engineer course on Code Academy, which hopefully will allow me to develop coding skills that I can use to start businesses or just work freelance as a software engineer or developer. I want to continue consistently making YouTube videos and writing blog posts and hopefully growing my personal brand. I'd also love to be able to improve my photography skills to the point where I'm able to do professional work and do paid gigs, and also, have the skill set to make and sell my own presets and other digital assets. And if I could get to a place where I could sell prints, that would just be amazing, because I think there's no greater honor than, having your work on somebody else's wall. And finally, the last thing that I'm doing is learning about different business models, because I would love to be able to start a business with my sister. You might notice that there's no real income question, and that's because I don't really set an income goal for myself currently, because, I'm still studying and I don't have a full-time job, and getting a part-time job would probably not be the best use of my time. like, sure, I could earn a few $1,000s and invest it, but I believe that if I instead focus on learning skills, then the ROI in like 5 to 10 years will be way better, when you learn a few skills than it would be if you earned an extra $5,000 or $10,000. So that's it for the financial health section. The next section is about mental, emotional, and spiritual health. And as you can see, there's kind of 3 basic questions. They're very similar, but just on each of those different domains that I mentioned. So how has your mental health been over the past 12 months? How has your emotional health been over the past 12 months? And how has your spiritual health been over the past 12 months? Starting with mental health, I mean, I'm quite lucky in that my mental health is pretty good, and obviously there's lots of things that go into mental health, such as physical health and sleep and, absence of financial stresses, and that kind of stuff. But I guess I simplify mental health into good if I have a positive outlook on the world, and bad if I have a negative outlook on the world. And I know that is an oversimplification, but I think that tends to work for me. And so this, as I said, it's got a very brief answer because I feel like I'm in a pretty good headspace right now, and I have been for the past 12 months. So emotional health, how does that differ from mental health? To me, emotional health is more about the emotions that you've experienced throughout the past 12 months, rather than your actual outlook on the world, and also how well you're able to control your emotions. So for the most part, I'd say I've been quite happy and content, but there definitely have been periods where I've been emotionally in labor, or in other words, I haven't been able to control my emotions particularly well. And so that's definitely something that I want to work on more next year, just having better control of my emotions. Finally, spiritual health. So spiritual health was something that I found to be quite a difficult thing to define. But I found this article online that I'll link in the description that kind of talks about 4 components of spiritual health. And that is connection with God, connection with yourself, connection with others, and connection with nature. So for me, spiritual health is probably the most neglected aspect of my overall health. I definitely do lots of reflection, and would say that my connection to myself is pretty good, as is my connection with the people who are important to me. But I guess it's more my connection with God that I have not spent as much time on over the past 12 months as I would like to. So I'll keep this part brief because I know it'll divide people, and some of you definitely don't want to hear about God, and I completely understand that. But I identify as a Hindu, and I choose to believe in God. And, it's funny. I used to, when I was, a year ago maybe, I used to be really obsessed with finding out the truth as to whether there was a God or not. Obviously, this is impossible. And now I've kind of gotten to a stage where it doesn't really matter whether God really exists or not. I don't need to necessarily, know the truth of it. All I need is to put my faith in God and choose to believe that there is a God. And in doing so, I get the benefits, whether or not, they're real or not. For me, the benefits are being able to offload some of my stress that I'm feeling, being able to ground myself, and being able to feel like there's more to this existence than what we experience during this lifetime. And if all it takes to reap those benefits is for me to, just choose to believe, then I don't see why I wouldn't do that. Anyways, I'll leave that there. Let's move on to the final section, and that is purpose. So what is this purpose section all about? For me, it's about what I think are the fundamental aspects of the human experience that should underpin how we approach life and make decisions. And so, to me, apart from developing meaningful relationships with other people and maintaining a spiritual connection with God, which I've already considered above, I'll be satisfied with my life if I spend it, 1, helping others and having a positive impact on the world, 2, living a life of integrity, 3, approaching my life with a goal of lifelong learning and making progress, 4, experiencing as many fun, novel, or varied experiences as possible, and 5, expressing creativity. So the questions that I've got here focus on the ways in which I have or haven't achieved these things. And then I try and predict how I can, continue to further myself in these domains in the future. So for example, this question about learning and progression, I think about all the different things that I've learnt this year or attempted to learn, as well as the ways that I've made progress in different areas of my life. And even if I don't necessarily stick with something, like for example, I tried to learn Spanish and, I threw it away very early on in the year. The fact that I'm trying to learn new things is the key. I want to, live a life where I'm continuously learning and making progress and growing as a person. So that's kind of like the main part of the review. To end my annual review, I kind of finish off by doing 4 things. Firstly, I clean my email inboxes and try to get as close to inbox zero as possible. And that's just because I find that when my inbox is cluttered, my mind is kind of cluttered. And so in cleaning it, it helps me just become a little less chaotic. The next thing that I do is I look at my money tracking application, which is Microsoft Money. That's where I track all my expenses and investments from the year. And I just see, what are the categories that I've spent things on and like how my investments are performing. Third thing that I do is that I flick through my journal entries from the year. So this is my little journal. I usually try and handwrite most of my notes, but I do actually sometimes type notes into Notion when I have a lot of things to say and I know it's going to take me hours and hours to handwrite them. And just the process of doing that, brings back little memories and nostalgia that I find really, really nice. And that's the same reasoning behind not only the organization of my photos and videos, but just making sure I look through them as well. I think that looking through your photos is a super underrated thing, but it brings so much happiness and joy. It's something that I've really only started doing recently. And yeah, it's just something that I'd highly recommend everyone should do, even probably more regularly than once a year. I'm always refining my annual review template and changing it as I learn more from other creators. So in a couple of years' time, I'll probably release another video where I update my annual review template. As you can see, this process is quite long and can take several hours to do at a bare minimum, but I think it's well worth it. I'd suggest breaking it down into a couple of sittings because if you try and do it all at once, you'll probably be so exhausted that you'll just whiz through it and not answer the questions properly. If you like this video, I'd really appreciate you hitting the like button down below and subscribing to my channel because I plan to make many more videos about self-development in the future. If you want to see how I bullet journal to maximize my productivity, click on this video here. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.